My name is Emma, and I'm 24 years old. People usually say I'm too young to know what love is, but honestly, I think I've always understood it better than most. Growing up, I was never one to follow the crowd, especially when it came to relationships. While my friends obsessed over finding the one or getting into long-term commitments, I always felt differently. I never bought into the fairy tale idea of monogamy, at least not the way it's portrayed in movies or books. To me, monogamy always seemed like a cage, a trap for insecure people who were afraid of losing control or being left alone. I've always been fiercely independent, and that extended to my views on love. For me, relationships didn't have to follow the traditional script. Love wasn't about settling down with one person for the rest of your life, it was about connection, freedom, and personal growth. I believed that if you loved someone, you should trust them enough to let them be themselves, even if that meant they might eventually want to explore someone else. After all, we're all human, right? But let me rewind a bit. There was a time when I thought I had it all figured out. I was in a relationship with James, someone I had been dating for almost 2 years. When we first met, I was drawn to his calm demeanor and his ability to match my wit. He was everything I thought I needed: smart, funny, and understanding. We shared similar interests, and there was an undeniable chemistry between us. But there was something I didn't expect: my own conflicting feelings about commitment. James, unlike me, believed in traditional relationships. He was the kind of guy who saw love as something sacred, something that deserved loyalty and exclusivity. At first, I admired this about him. It felt safe, comfortable. But the more we got serious, the more I began to feel cornered. I didn't want to be tied down. I didn't want to have to check in every time I went out or feel guilty for having my own space. To me, that kind of relationship felt suffocating. I never told James exactly how I felt at first, but I made it clear in subtle ways. I'd joke about it with friends, saying things like, "Monogamy is for insecure men." It was always said with a laugh, but deep down, I believed it. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to tie themselves to just one person forever, especially in a world where there's so much to explore. I thought love should be liberating, not restrictive. Then came the night it all went wrong. We were at a party, and James had been unusually quiet the entire evening. I noticed the way he looked at me, his eyes filled with disappointment, and I knew something was off. After everyone had left, he confronted me about my casual attitude toward our relationship. He asked me why I always avoided the topic of exclusivity. Why did I have such a hard time embracing the idea of us as a permanent couple? I felt the tension rising, and instead of listening to him, I did what I always did: I deflected. In a moment of frustration, I blurted out, "Monogamy is for insecure men." It was a defensive reaction, something I said in a half-joking, half-serious tone. But I saw the look on his face, and I knew I had crossed a line. He didn't laugh, didn't even smile. He just looked at me, disappointed, hurt. And for the first time in our relationship, I saw a side of him I hadn't expected, someone who wasn't willing to compromise on his values. He didn't say much after that. He just walked away. Later, I tried to reach out to him, but he wasn't responsive. For the next few days, he barely spoke to me, and the space between us grew wider. I thought it was just a phase, a momentary disagreement. But it wasn't. James ended things a week later, telling me that he couldn't be with someone who didn't value the same things he did, someone who saw love as something fluid rather than something sacred. He said, "I need someone who believes in loyalty, in exclusivity." And just like that, he was gone. I stood there, stunned. It didn't make sense to me. Why was he so hurt? Why couldn't he just understand that I wasn't like everyone else? In my mind, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But his departure left a void that I hadn't anticipated, and the weight of my words hung over me like a cloud. After James left, I didn't immediately feel the pangs of heartbreak I expected. It was like a numbness settled over me. I told myself that I was fine, that everything would be okay. After all, it wasn't like we had built a life together. It wasn't like we were married or anything. But as the days went on, I began to realize how deeply his absence affected me. It wasn't the breakup itself, it was the realization that my own beliefs had led me to this point. I'd always prided myself on being strong, independent, and unwavering in my beliefs about love. The whole idea of monogamy had always seemed constricting to me. I never understood why people felt the need to commit so fully to one person, to stake everything on a single relationship. I had seen my friends get hurt by their partners, their marriages end in divorce, and all I could think was, what's the point? Love was supposed to be free, unrestrained. I believed that love should be about growth and mutual understanding, not about locking someone down with promises of forever. But as much as I tried to justify my views, I couldn't escape the reality that I had hurt someone who had once meant so much to me. And it wasn't just a small hurt, it was deep, raw, and real. James wasn't the kind of guy who was looking for casual flings or fleeting connections. He believed in the stability of a committed relationship, and he wanted that with me. I knew this, yet I had pushed him away, dismissed his beliefs as if they were unimportant, and made him feel small for wanting what I couldn't give. I spent weeks trying to convince myself that I didn't care. It was easy to convince my friends, too. They all knew I had been the one who had broken things off, and they rallied around me, telling me that I was better off without him. "You're too good for him," they said. "You don't need someone who can't accept your independence." But inside, I knew I had messed up. I had pushed James away, not because he was wrong for me, but because I couldn't face the fear of losing my freedom. I couldn't face the idea of being tied down. Still, I couldn't admit this to myself completely. I told myself that I was just fine, that I didn't need someone like James, that I was better off single, living life on my own terms. But then, one evening, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a photo of James. It was a candid shot of him and a woman, someone new, taken at a cafe, both of them smiling, looking genuinely happy. And for the first time since our breakup, I felt a sharp, gut-wrenching pain. It was like a wave hit me all at once, and suddenly I realized that I wasn't as okay as I had thought. I didn't know who this woman was, but the fact that James had moved on so quickly stung. Part of me felt angry that he had been able to do what I couldn't do. He had let go of me so easily, while I was left in this emotional limbo, stuck on the past. But there was something else too, a sense of loss, a deep, unsettling sense of regret. Why did it hurt so much to see him with someone else? I had always told myself I didn't need monogamy. I had told myself that freedom was the most important thing, but now, seeing him with someone else, I was faced with the truth. I was scared of losing him, of being alone, of the very thing I had pushed away. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself that this was just part of life, that James and I weren't meant to be. But every time I saw him pop up on my feed with his new girlfriend, every time I heard something about their relationship from mutual friends, it was like a little piece of me shattered. I wasn't angry at him, not really. I was angry at myself for pushing him away, for not being brave enough to give him what he wanted. In the weeks that followed, I found myself obsessing over every little detail of their relationship. What did she have that I didn't? Was she more secure, more open to the idea of commitment? I would lie to myself and say that I didn't care, but deep down, I was jealous. I hadn't thought I'd be the jealous type, but there I was, scrolling through every photo, analyzing every caption, wondering if I had made a mistake. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my jealousy wasn't about her, it was about me. I was angry at myself for making a choice that didn't align with my true feelings. I was angry at myself for thinking that monogamy was a weakness when, in reality, I was the one who was afraid to commit. It wasn't James or his new relationship that hurt, it was the realization that I had been the one to sabotage what could have been something beautiful. I spent weeks trying to convince myself that moving on was the right thing. I threw myself into work, focused on my friends, and avoided anything that might make me think of James and his new relationship. But it didn't work. The more I tried to push my feelings away, the more they crept back in. It was almost as if I couldn't escape the truth. I missed him. I missed the connection we had shared, the way he could make me laugh, and the way he understood me like no one else. But most of all, I missed the part of myself that I had lost in pushing him away, the part that had believed in love, even if it wasn't wrapped in the package I had once thought it should be. The turning point came when I ran into James by chance. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was at the local bookstore, browsing through the new releases. As I flipped through the pages of a book, my eyes wandered to the cafe section of the store. And there he was. James. Sitting at a small table with his new girlfriend, laughing over coffee. For a split second, my heart stopped. I wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen him. But I couldn't. I stood frozen, watching them interact. She was beautiful in a way I couldn't help but notice. She had that confident, radiant energy that seemed so effortless, the kind of energy I had always admired in others but never truly felt in myself. They were so comfortable together, so natural. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation. I felt like an outsider, watching them in a bubble that didn't include me. My first instinct was to leave, to escape from this situation before it hurt too much. But then, unexpectedly, James saw me. His eyes met mine across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment, just surprise. And maybe a little sadness. Before I could gather myself to walk away, he stood up and approached me. I was frozen in place, unsure of what to do. My heart was racing. I wasn't ready for this. He smiled weakly, and for a moment, I saw the same James the first had known, the one who used to know exactly what I was thinking without having to say a word. He looked at me, and then at the woman sitting at the table, and then back at me. "Emma," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of hesitation. "I didn't expect to see you here." I could feel the tension building between us, but I forced myself to smile. "It's just a coincidence," I said, trying to sound casual, like this was no big deal. But we both knew it was. "I didn't know you were into coffee," he added, his voice carrying a certain tenderness that made my heart ache. I had no idea how to respond. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't help but notice the difference between the man standing before me now and the one I had pushed away so carelessly. He wasn't the same. He had moved on. He was happy. "Yeah, I'm just grabbing a book," I said, gesturing vaguely at the shelf behind me. I didn't mean to interrupt. "You're not interrupting," he said, glancing back at his girlfriend. This is Sarah." He introduced her with a warmth that made something inside me tighten. "And this is Emma, from before," he added, like we were just passing acquaintances, strangers with history. "Hi," Sarah said, smiling politely. There was no animosity in her expression, just calm friendliness. I hated that. I hated how easy it seemed for her to be kind to me, how comfortable she was in this space that had once been mine. I wanted to say something, anything, to show that I didn't belong here, but I couldn't. "Hi," I managed, my voice sounding weak even to myself. There was an uncomfortable silence, and I felt out of place in my own skin. James shifted slightly, looking between Sarah and me, as if searching for the right words. But none of them came. I didn't need to say anything more. I realized then that everything had changed. I had lost my chance with him, and there was no going back. "I should probably go," I said, trying to hold myself together. "But it's good to see you both." "Really?" James nodded, and for a second, his gaze softened. I could see the flicker of something behind his eyes, something like regret, but also acceptance. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said quietly, before turning back to Sarah and sitting down again. I walked away, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I had spent so long convincing myself that I didn't need him, that I was better off alone. But now, faced with the reality of him moving on, I saw the truth. I had been wrong. I had been the one too afraid to face my own insecurities, too afraid to admit that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about freedom or independence. It was about vulnerability and trust, about allowing someone to hold a piece of your heart and be willing to do the same for them. And I had pushed that away. As I left the bookstore, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something irreplaceable. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the loss wasn't just about James. It was about me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward understanding what love really meant. I spent days replaying that moment in the bookstore over and over in my head. The conversation with James, the way his eyes lingered on me for just a fraction too long, as if he, too, was questioning the path he'd chosen. And then Sarah, so calm, so composed. There was nothing hostile in her demeanor, nothing that suggested I was anything but another face in the crowd. But I felt it. I felt the walls that had gone up around me the moment I saw them together. The walls I had built for myself all along, trying to convince myself that I didn't need love, didn't need commitment. I had been so focused on what I thought I wanted that I hadn't even realized what I had lost. It wasn't about James anymore. I had spent so much time blaming him, convincing myself that he was the one who was wrong for me. I was too proud to admit the truth to anyone, but I knew it now. I had pushed him away, and I had done it because I was scared. Scared of losing myself, scared of feeling weak, scared of depending on someone. I had been so determined to keep my independence intact that I had neglected the fact that independence and love weren't mutually exclusive. I had been so focused on the idea of monogamy as a constraint, something that stifled freedom, that I couldn't see how beautiful it could be, how freeing it could be, to trust someone so completely, to let them in. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just the relationship with James that I had sabotaged, it was my own growth, my own ability to open myself up to the possibility of something real. In pushing him away, I had been pushing away a version of myself that I wasn't ready to face. I had been too focused on what I thought I should be, on what society had taught me about love and independence, that I had ignored the most basic truth: love, in any form, requires vulnerability. I spent the next few days in a quiet haze, trying to figure out what I could possibly do next. I wasn't ready to reach out to James, not yet. It felt too soon, too raw. But there was a part of me that felt like I needed to at least acknowledge my own mistakes before I could even think about reconciliation. I began journaling, writing out my thoughts, my feelings, trying to make sense of everything. It was through those late-night sessions, scribbling out the raw truth on paper, that I started to understand the weight of my actions. I had told myself I was free, that I didn't need anyone to define me, but I realized that in my attempt to protect myself from the fear of dependence, I had closed myself off to everything I had truly wanted. I had made a mistake in thinking that love was something to be feared. It wasn't. Love was something to be cherished, something to give and receive in return. After all of this, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let fear rule my life anymore. I needed to be brave, to admit to James and, more importantly, to myself, that I was ready to embrace the vulnerability I had been so afraid of. The next time I saw him, I wouldn't run away. I would speak my truth, no matter how messy or uncomfortable it was. I wouldn't let the past dictate my future. And maybe, just maybe, I could show him that I was ready to let him back into my life, not as a way to fix the past, but as a way to build something new, something better. I hadn't expected to feel so nervous when the day finally came. I had spent so much time thinking about what I needed to say to James, what I wanted to convey to him. But now, standing outside his apartment, I felt a wave of doubt crash over me. What if he had already moved on completely? What if this was a mistake? My palms were sweating, and my heart was beating faster than it should have been. I stood there for a moment, my breath shaky. I had spent weeks convincing myself I didn't need him, that I didn't need love. But here I was, standing at his door, ready to face the truth, whatever that truth might be. When James opened the door, I saw the familiar warmth in his eyes. But there was something different this time. He wasn't the man I had once known, he had grown in ways I hadn't expected. He had changed, just as I had. We both had, in our own ways. "Emma," he said, his voice soft. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wasn't sure if I should come," I replied, feeling vulnerable under his gaze. "But I had to. I've been thinking about everything, and I need to say something. Something that I didn't realize until recently." He stepped aside and motioned for me to come in, his expression calm but cautious. I entered, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. We sat down on the couch, and I could feel the tension between us. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of tension that had defined our relationship before. It wasn't anger or fear. It was something else, something I hadn't known we had until now: understanding. "I've been thinking about the way I pushed you away," I began, my voice shaky but steady. "About the things I said, the way I acted. And I realize now that I was scared. Scared of getting too close, scared of depending on you. I thought that if I didn't need you, I could protect myself from getting hurt. But the truth is, I hurt myself more in the process." James listened, his eyes never leaving mine. There was no judgment in his expression, just quiet understanding. And in that moment, I knew that this was the first step toward healing, for both of us. "I was wrong," I continued, the words coming out easier now. "Monogamy, relationships, all of it, it wasn't about control. It was about trust. And I didn't trust myself, or you, enough to see that." He leaned back, his eyes softening. "I'm not perfect, Emma. I've made mistakes too. But I think, in the end, we both learned something. I've moved on with Sarah, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten everything we had. It's just, life happened, and we changed." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. I know, James. And I don't want you to think that I'm asking for anything more. I'm not. I just needed to say this. I needed to apologize for pushing you away. I needed to apologize for not seeing the value in what we had. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had said what I needed to say, and James had heard me. There was no anger in the air, no resentment. Just a mutual understanding that life had taken us in different directions, and that was okay. James stood up and walked over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt warm and genuine. "I'm glad you came here today," he said quietly. "You don't have to apologize. We both made our choices. And maybe, in the end, we both found something better for ourselves." We shared a moment of silence, and I realized that I had done what I needed to do, not just for James, but for me. I had faced my fears, accepted my mistakes, and learned to embrace vulnerability. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't upset. I was free. As I left his apartment, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. There was no bitterness, no regret. Just the knowledge that I had grown, that I had learned, and that I was ready to face whatever came next, with or without him. I had finally found peace. Subscribe to our channel for powerful real stories that touch your heart. Join a community where emotions run deep and every story brings a new perspective. Don't miss out, hit that bell for weekly updates.